Hey, let me tell you something. It doesn't take an army to change the course of history. Sometimes, it just takes one man, one Indian with ambition, with pride, with a vision that clashed with America's, made a decision so powerful, it shook the entire relationship. One choice, my friends, can either build a bridge or burn it down. And this man, he lit the match. Sometimes people believe that history is shaped only by great armies, by governments, by treaties written in stone. But let me tell you something, my friends. History can be rewritten by the decision of just one man. It does not take millions of soldiers or billions of dollars to shake the ground beneath nations. Sometimes it only takes the conviction of one individual who dares to go against the tide. One man who refuses to bend. One man who says no more. And in this story of how U.S.-India relations began to crumble, it was not an entire government, not an entire movement, but the choice of one Indian that began the fire. You see, the world underestimates the power of individual action. They think that one voice cannot rise against the noise of superpowers. But they forget great leaders, great revolutions, great wars have always been sparked by one decision. Alexander marched east because of one thought. Gandhi challenged an empire with one act of defiance. And in the same way, this one Indian made a choice that shook the mighty relationship between Washington and New Delhi. A single moment of resolve became the hammer that cracked the foundation. Why does one choice matter so much? Because nations are not made only of policies. They are made of trust, respect, and balance. When one man decides to reject that balance, when he chooses pride over cooperation, when he decides to prove a point instead of building a bridge, the entire system feels the earthquake. It is like pulling a single brick from a tall tower. Maybe you think it's small. Maybe you think it's insignificant. But if it's the wrong brick, the whole tower collapses. That is exactly what happened here. This Indian, with the weight of 1 billion people behind him, looked at the world's most powerful nation and said, I will not follow. I will not obey. I will not obey. I will not let America dictate terms. That defiance echoed like thunder. Some called it courage, others called it arrogance. But what cannot be denied is that it was powerful. America expected compliance, but instead they got resistance. And resistance is contagious. It spreads like fire. One man's choice did not remain his own. It became the voice of a nation. That is why the impact was so devastating. The power of one decision is like the swing of an axe. With every strike, the tree may look strong, it may look unshaken, but deep inside, the cracks are forming. And then one final blow brings the whole giant crashing down. The relationship between the U.S. and India had been built with effort, with diplomacy, with years of delicate negotiation. But one bold strike, one refusal, one rejection, one declaration was enough to create cracks too wide to repair. People ask, how can one man destroy the trust between two nations? The answer is simple, because leadership is symbolic. Leaders are not just individuals, they are the faces of their nations. When this Indian spoke, he spoke as India. When he defied, it was India defying. When he resisted, it was India resisting. America did not see one man. America saw a country turning away. And that is why one choice became a turning point in history. Remember this, my friends. The world is not shaped by the masses. It is shaped by moments. And in this story, one Indian had the courage, or the audacity, depending on how you see it, to make a choice that sent shockwaves across the globe. He became the spark that lit the fire, the stone that started the avalanche, the drop of water that caused the flood. America felt betrayed, India felt empowered, and the relationship between the two nations would never be the same again. So never underestimate the power of one decision. Never underestimate the impact of one man's choice. Because when the right man stands in the right moment, he can either create alliances that last centuries, or he can destroy them in an instant. And that, my friends, is how the choice of one Indian destroyed the foundation of U.S.-India relations. When we talk about relations between nations, we often talk about strategy, economics, military power, and diplomacy. But behind all of that, there is something far more human, far more dangerous, and far more destructive. That thing is ego. Ego is the silent killer of partnerships. It is the invisible wall that no negotiation can climb. And in the case of U.S.-India relations, ego was the sword that cut through years of progress. One man's decision, driven not by logic but by pride, became the spark that turned allies into adversaries. Let's be clear about something. Ego is not strength. Ego disguises itself as confidence, but in reality, it is insecurity with armor on. It is the refusal to bend even when bending could save everything. And this is exactly what happened. America came with expectations, with demands, with a sense of superiority. India, represented by one determined leader, refused to bow down. On the surface, it looked like courage. But beneath that defiance, ego was the real player. The refusal to compromise, the insistence on a my way or no way, is what burned the bridge. When leaders put ego above diplomacy, they stop listening. And when they stop listening, trust collapses. America did not want to hear a no. India did not want to be dictated to. Instead of finding the middle path, both sides became locked in a staring contest, each waiting for the other to blink. But this Indian leader chose to hold his ground, not because it was the smartest move, not because it was the most strategic move, but because pride demanded it. He wanted to show the world that India would never bend under American pressure. And while that stance made him a hero at home, it also made him a villain abroad. Think about it. In personal life, if you refuse to compromise with a friend, you lose that friend. If you refuse to apologize to your partner, the relationship falls apart. Now magnify that on the scale of two giant nations, each with billions of dollars, millions of people, and global influence at stake. One act of stubbornness, one refusal to compromise, and suddenly the relationship is no longer a partnership, it becomes a battleground. That is the cost of ego. America has always believed in leading, in controlling, and shaping outcomes in its favor. India, under this man's leadership, wanted to prove it could stand tall without leaning on anyone. Both positions could have coexisted, but ego made them collide. It was not about policy anymore. It was about pride. And when pride takes over, rational thinking disappears. Agreements are not judged by what is fair, but by what feeds the ego. Discussions are not about solutions, but about dominance. That is how diplomacy turns into destruction. What makes this story so powerful is that it was avoidable. It didn't have to end this way. America could have shown humility. India could have shown flexibility. But one Indian made the choice to push back with full force. He wanted the world to know that India was not a follower, not a junior partner, not a puppet of Washington. And while that message inspired his nation, it sent a very different message to America, that India was no longer willing to play along. The moment ego entered the room, cooperation left through the back door. This is the danger of pride without balance. Ego blinds leaders to the bigger picture. Instead of asking, how do we build a stronger relationship? They ask, how do I look more powerful than the other side? And when leaders play that game, nobody wins. America felt humiliated. India felt triumphant. But in the long run, both nations lost trust, both nations lost opportunities, and the world lost stability. So what do we learn? We learn that strength is not the absence of compromise. True strength is knowing when to stand firm and when to bend. A tree that refuses to bend in the storm will break, but a tree that bends will survive and grow stronger. This Indian leader refused to bend. His ego demanded defiance. And though he looked unshakable in that moment, his decision caused cracks that would haunt U.S.-India relations for years to come. For years to come. Ego might win you applause today, but it will cost you alliances tomorrow. And that is exactly what happened here. One Indian, driven by pride, destroyed a relationship that could have changed the future of both nations. All because ego shouted louder than wisdom. Wisdom. When two giants collide, the world shakes. And that is exactly what happened when America and India found themselves on opposite sides of one man's choice. For decades, the United States walked with the confidence of a superpower, expecting nations to follow its lead. But India, under the voice of this one defiant leader, refused to play the role of the obedient partner. It was no longer about agreements or policies. It was about a clash of superpowers. One side wanted dominance, the other wanted independence. And when both refused to step back, the collision was inevitable. Think of it like a heavyweight fight. On one side, you have America, the champion, the nation that has dictated the global order for decades, the fighter with experience, resources, and control. On the other side, India, rising fast, young, strong, determined, carrying the weight of 1 billion hopes on its shoulders. For years, India had been in training, building its muscles, gaining confidence. But the moment came when India stepped into the ring, and this one leader threw the first punch. America didn't expect it, and the world didn't believe it. Yet the punch landed hard. This was not just a disagreement. This was a shock to the system. America had grown used to nations falling in line, but India's defiance was different. It was not a whisper of resistance. It was a roar. This Indian stood up and told the most powerful nation in the world, "We will not bend to your terms. We will make our own path." That was not just defiance. It was a declaration of independence on the global stage. And when such words are spoken, they cannot be ignored. The clash was not only political, it was psychological. America saw itself as the global leader, but suddenly it faced a challenger with both courage and numbers. India had the population, the growing economy, the ambition. And behind it all was the will of this leader who dared to say no. That refusal hit America like a thunderbolt. It was not just about losing influence in one country. It was about the possibility of losing control over an entire region. That is why this clash mattered so much. It was more than diplomacy. It was a battle for dominance. And let me tell you, when superpowers clash, there are no small consequences. Every move sends shockwaves. Other nations were watching closely. They were asking, if India can resist, why can't we? America's aura of control began to crack. One man's decision became the inspiration for others to question U.S. authority. It was as if India had thrown a stone into a calm lake, and the ripple spread far beyond its borders. But the clash also had costs. America, feeling challenged, could not afford to look weak. Retaliation became inevitable. Sanctions, political pressure, and diplomatic coldness followed. Meanwhile, India doubled down, standing firm, refusing to show weakness. Neither side wanted to back away. Can they really be trusted? That doubt changes everything. It creates distance, it creates suspicion, it creates tension, and that tension eats away at the relationship from within. This Indian's choice was not just bold, it was final. It was the kind of move that cannot be undone. Because once you reveal your true stance, there is no hiding it again. India had shown America that it would not be a follower, and America had seen enough to realize the old balance was gone. That realization was the moment of no return. But here's the deeper truth. Breaking trust is more powerful than breaking agreements. Agreements can be rewritten, policies can be changed, sanctions can be lifted. But trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild, and that is why this one man's action was so devastating. He didn't just challenge America. He didn't just reject a deal. He destroyed the trust at the very core of the relationship. And what happens when trust disappears? Fear takes its place. Suspicion takes its place. Instead of cooperation, you get competition. Instead of partnership, you get rivalry. Instead of peace, you get the seeds of conflict. That is the price of broken trust, and both America and India paid it. So remember this lesson. Trust is the strongest weapon, but also the most fragile. Use it wisely, guard it carefully, because once it's gone, even the strongest alliances crumble. This Indian broke the trust, and with it he destroyed the possibility of America and India truly standing together. And that, my friends, is a mistake that cannot be erased. The story of how one Indian destroyed U.S.-India relations is not just a story about two nations, it is a lesson for the entire world. Because what happened here reveals something universal about power, pride, and leadership. It shows us that strength without wisdom is dangerous, and pride without balance is destructive. It teaches us that the choices of one person can alter the course of history, and that every leader carries the weight of their nation on their shoulders. This is not just a political story, it is a human story, a story of mistakes and consequences that the whole world must learn from. The first lesson is that power must always be guided by strategy. A sword is strong, but without direction it cuts the wrong way. America had power, India had pride, but both lacked the wisdom to guide their actions in that moment. This Indian leader stood tall, unafraid, unwilling to bend. That courage inspired millions, but it also carried risks. Without careful strategy, that courage turned into conflict. And when power clashes without purpose, the result is always chaos. The world saw it happen. Alliances shattered, trust broken, opportunities lost, all because strength was not balanced with wisdom. The second lesson is about pride. Pride can be beautiful. It gives nations dignity. It gives leaders confidence. It gives people hope. But unchecked pride is like fire. It warms at first, then burns everything in its path. This Indian, driven by pride, made a choice to stand against the world's strongest nation. It was bold, it was heroic in the eyes of many, but it came at a price. Pride made compromise impossible. Pride turned negotiation into confrontation. And in the end, pride destroyed a partnership that could have changed the world. The lesson for leaders everywhere is clear. Pride without humility leads to destruction. The third lesson is about trust. Trust is the invisible currency of diplomacy. You can have weapons, you can have armies, you can have money, but without trust, none of it matters. The decision of this one Indian broke that currency. America no longer trusted India, and India no longer trusted America. And when trust dies, partnerships die with it. The world must learn that trust is harder to build than any weapon, and once lost, it is nearly impossible to restore. The fourth lesson is about responsibility. Leaders are not just individuals. They are the embodiment of their nations. When this Indian spoke, the world did not hear one man. They heard a billion people. When he acted, the world did not see one leader. They saw a country making its choice. That is the weight of leadership. And that is why every leader must understand that their decisions ripple across history. A single word, a single act can change the future of nations. This Indian made such a choice, and it reshaped the destiny of U.S.-India relations forever. And finally, the fifth lesson is about the fragility of global order. Many people think the world is stable, that alliances are permanent, that superpowers are untouchable. But history shows us otherwise. Alliances rise and fall. Superpowers clash and crumble. Oh! All it takes is one decision, one miscalculation, one act of defiance to shift the balance of power. This story reminds us that the world is never fixed. It is always in motion, always vulnerable to the choices of individuals. And that is why wisdom, patience, and humility are the true weapons of great leaders. So, what should the world take away from this? That history is not written only by armies or treaties. It is written by moments. Moments when leaders choose pride over compromise, ego over diplomacy, defiance over trust. This Indian's moment of choice became one of those turning points. It destroyed what could have been a strong alliance, and it showed the world that even giants can fall when they forget the power of wisdom. My friends, this is the lesson. Never underestimate the power of one person, one choice, one act. And never forget that strength must always be guided by wisdom, or else it becomes the weapon of destruction. That is how one Indian destroyed U.S. India relations, and that is the warning the world must never ignore.